Hello and welcome to this special author chat for the SFF Spotlight event that's happening on the 29th of September in Shrewsbury at the Nerdy Cafe. I'm your host, Frasier Armitage, part-time robot, full-time nerd, author of New Yesterday and Time's Ellipse. Joining me today is epic fantasy legend, Stephen Aryan. How are you doing,
Legend, I
Stephen?
like that. I'm good. Yeah, I've never been introduced as legend before. I like that. That sounds good.
Yeah, well,
I'll take
you
it.
you live up to the title. You live up to the mantle, Stephen. It's amazing. Um,
Well, I love all this praise. This is going really well, Fraser. I'm enjoying this.
yeah, it's only going to go downhill from here. This is the thing.
Okay,
It's
so
like,
we'll start high and then just go down. Yeah, okay.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
all right. Good, good.
So first of all, are you looking forward to this spotlight event that's happening in Shrewsbury?
Yeah, it's really local to me. I think it's going to have a real good mix of workshops and panels. So it'd be really good for people who are just starting out on their writing journey. Perhaps they want to get into it. They don't know where to start. They want more information, but also it gives them an opportunity to come along to a local event, really nearby, chat to some authors and writers and just find out more about the process and learn about some new authors, hopefully, and pick up some great books. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to meeting some of the authors that I've only met again online and just doing a local event, which I think is really good.
Yeah, and there's been so many events this year that have been absolutely like huge. Like
Yes.
we were both at Worldcon, and it's just like thousands and thousands of people. For anybody who's not attended an event before, the one at Shrewsbury is not going to be like that. It's not an
No.
intimidating place to
No.
come to. So, yeah, it's. Are you looking forward to doing like that smaller sort of intimate event?
Yeah, because as you said, at like a Worldcon, there's thousands of people, and you don't get a chance to have good and interesting conversations with people. You don't get to kind of ask them a bunch of stuff because there simply isn't time, or you're going off to another panel, or some panels were so full people just couldn't get into the room, and they'd sort of try 3 panels. And I'm sorry, you can't come in because it's full. So this is an opportunity for people to come along, talk to writers, ask all those questions that you're not quite sure about, things you're not sure about, and just no one's going to say that's a stupid question. If you don't know, you don't know. So ask. When I was starting out, I would ask all these questions and say, I don't understand this. How does this work? What does this mean? And it gives people a chance to sit down, talk to people, find out, go to these panels, learn about things, and just do it face to face and do it in a much more smaller and intimate venue where you have a chance to spend time and hopefully come away feeling like you got the answers that you wanted to those questions that have been bugging you about writing or publishing or agents or whatever it might be.
And because you've benefited from these kinds of events in the past, do you kind of feel
Mm.
like now that you're like almost like you've gone from Padawan to you've become the master kind of thing? When you get the chance to give back, it's like
Yeah. So when I started out, before I was published, I spent 10 years going to events, EasterCon, WorldCon, FantasyCon in the UK, and going to these events and listening to panels with authors, editors, agents talk about how they got started, how do they write, how do they plan books, how do they do world building, all of these things that I've basically absorbed over those 10 years until I got to the point where I was ready and I was picked up by my agent. But now, it's 10 years on from then now. So I've been in the business nearly 10 years, 9 years since my debut novel. So yeah, I've got a lot of information now to share, having been behind the scenes on the other side of it, as it were, for nearly 10 years. So yeah, I'm looking forward to passing it on so people learn from me, learn from my mistakes, and don't repeat some things that I did. And hopefully it'll help them overcome some of the obstacles a little bit more easily than I did when I was coming up.
yeah. And have you seen sort of like somebody who's trying to get into writing now and trying to break into it? Publishing must have changed so much, in the time that you've been writing. It's nice to have sort of current information from people who are involved with publishing right now. So there might be questions you might have asked 10 years ago that now you're asking totally different questions, right? It's have
Yeah,
you seen that change?
it's definitely evolved from when I started over 10 years ago trying to get an agent. The self-publishing was just beginning. It wasn't really a thing. It was, Kindle was in its very, very early stages, and ebooks were brand new back like 10, 12 years ago. No one really understood what was going on, and self-publishing wasn't what it has become now, and the market has changed so much. And because of how prominent self-publishing is now, you get some authors that start as self-publishing and stay as that. Some are hybrid, some move from one to the other and back again. So it's changed in the way that there are more opportunities, there are more ways you can be published. And I think just reminding people of that, like some people will just think, oh, well, what do I do if my book's rejected, but I really want to do something with it still? And there's now, it's no longer a case of you just put that book down and move on. There are other things you can do with it. So just presenting that information to people now and saying, okay, what do you want to do with your books? What are you trying to achieve? And based upon that, you can then guide them to the best approach for if they want writing as a hobby or they want writing as a full-time career. It's a totally different answer. So
Yeah, that's great. It's really good, and it's so nice that you got this like open invitation almost from all of these experienced authors and everyone who's going to be there. Just come along, ask questions. Don't be intimidated. Just come along and chat. It's going to be such a nice vibe to have that, isn't it? It's such a useful
yeah,
resource for people.
a really relaxed atmosphere as well. There's not going to be any massive pressure. And sometimes asking a question in front of a crowd, people aren't comfortable doing that. So we'll be sat around during the event. We can just come up to us and chat one-on-one if you don't ask a question in front of the crowd and, in front of a room full of people. Just come up and talk to us. We're there all day and just ask us those questions that have been bugging you, things that you want to know that will help you with your writing. So we're all happy there to share what information we've gathered over the years, really.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Are you on panels this year for the event?
Yes, I'm doing one panel on writing your first novel, and I'm also doing a workshop on world building. So those who primarily looking at fantasy world building, where do you start? What is the approach? How do you get on with it? So I'm going to kind of lay out some basics, suggest some possible techniques that people could learn from, and then we're going to have a go. We're going to have a go and make something up, and then we'll see what people have come up with and just a bit of fun, play around with it, share ideas, and just sort of show also where the other people will approach things. If I kind of set out a framework and say to people, right, go off and do something, you always get really different ideas coming back and answers to what they've based upon their own experiences. So that's always quite a fun thing too, because someone say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, that's really new to me," and it's just from a very quick experiment. So it shows you how you can kind of give 100 people the same question, and the answers you'll get back will be radically different. And that always happens with fantasy world building. So it's a fascinating kind of experiment to see what people do, and I really enjoy it. I'm often surprised by people, and so that's really quite rewarding.
Yeah. Do you get many ideas that where you come back, you're thinking, "Oh, I now have to read that book because that sounds awesome"?
Yeah. So I've done some like guest lectures at universities before for creative writing students, and there again you pose this kind of world building thing, and then some of the answers come back, and you're like, "That sounds really cool. That I would never have thought of that in 1,000 years." Like there are some authors that I read their book and I think that kind of a story would never occur to me. That kind of a character, it's never something that I would have even thought of. And so it's always good having that kind of a group feedback as in a way, because other people then start sparking ideas of other people and going, yeah, that's so cool. Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And it's that kind of, you get people pondering and thinking and just kind of coming up with stuff in the moment. And creative writing exercises are always fun. So I think it spurs other people on to want to do more writing if they hear cool ideas and exciting things. They're like, oh yeah, I could do something like that. So yeah, it's really rewarding for me, but also for everybody else in the room, I think.
Yeah, that's perfect. On talking of like ideas, and let's stray away from ideas you could never come up with to ideas that you have come up with, because you're like epic fantasy. You're a master of epic fantasy, Stephen.
Oh.
It's true. So, but your latest book, The Blood Dim Tide, that's book
Yes.
2 in a series, right?
Yes,
So,
trilogy,
for
yes.
anybody who's not read like the Judas Blossom or isn't sort of involved with this sort of the world that you've created, just give people a little bit of like the basics as to what that world is and the kind of path that the story's taking.
Yeah, so the first book you mentioned is The Judas Blossom. There it is. Lovely cover by Sarah O'Flaherty, who designed that. So that's published by Angry Robot. So my previous series before then, I've done 3 series. This is my 4th series. This is completely new. You don't have to read any of those. It's totally separate. I wanted to do something different. So this is historical fantasy. So it is set within the real world. It's set within the 13th century. It starts in the year 1260. But I've introduced some fantastic elements and I'm mixing fact and fiction together. I wanted to create something that was reminiscent of that period, that feels like the 13th century. I'm borrowing a lot of information from real events that happened. I'm borrowing some real characters that happened, but I'm also blending it with people that I've created. and a bit of magic, and kind of weaving between the raindrops of history to tell an interesting story. And so in 1260, 13th century, I'm set my story in ancient Persia. And during this period of time, the Mongol Empire was this huge kind of massive empire that spans an enormous part of the world. Genghis Khan started it and started growing out of Mongolia. And in the period that my story takes place, his grandsons have now taken on that legacy. And they are trying to grow the empire to essentially cover the entire world and create the Mongol Empire, covering every known country and nation. And we focus on ancient Persia. And what's happening is they're pushing west. They're going towards Europe. They're going south towards kind of Africa and Egypt predominantly. They're going towards the north of India. And they're trying to grow the empire. And the story focuses on a group of rebels in Persia. They've already been conquered. The army is lost. They've now been occupied by the Mongols, who are now pushing the borders of the empire even further. And so now I have this group of rebels that have no army, and they're essentially trying to fight back and take down this part of the Mongol Empire from the inside. So they're seeping into various organizations and territories and structures and trying to find ways to take them down. There is a secret society that's kind of infiltrating different parts of society as well and trying to take them apart. There's a soldier who essentially starts working for the enemy so that he can learn more about them, and he understands how they work and how the Persians lost and what do they have that the Persians didn't, and this kind of thing. So there's all these different facets of the story where people are trying to essentially destabilize the Mongol Empire. But the problem is, at this period in time, which is true, it was so big that it was incredibly difficult to manage, and some of the cracks were starting to show. There was a lot of infighting. There were people vying for power. And so the first book kind of sets all that up. And then the new book that came out this year, The Blood Dim Tide, the second book in the trilogy, continues that story. It's the rebels have now they've made some gains, they've had some success, but it's still this enormous machine that kind of spans thousands and thousands of miles. And they have still have the large armies and things. And they're trying to make alliances with other people in order to destabilize them and break them apart. And it's a long, ongoing struggle. It's a long, difficult thing. It's not a kind of, you have one battle and then you defeat them, and that's the end of the war, and the Mongol Empire crumbles. It's a case of they've won some battles, but the war continues, and it's about their continued attempts to make things more difficult for the Mongols, to find more rebels, to inspire more people to rebel, to show the fact that it can be done, that the fact that despite the Mongols being this huge, powerful empire with a vast army, you can still fight against them. You can still win, and you can still hopefully have freedom for your own countries. And so the second part of the trilogy is out, and book 3 is written. That will be out next year.
That's really exciting. I love that sentence that you said earlier about weaving between the raindrops of history. When it comes to figuring that out and figuring, okay, how much space have I got here to play with? Has that been fun in like the research that you've done and in sort of, figuring out, putting fiction into the facts?
It's been a challenge. It's been the most challenging series I've ever written before, because in the first book, all of the main tentpole events are actual historic events. They all actually happened. Who was there and how long they went on, I've had to manipulate so that the story feels more cohesive, because sometimes a war might go on for 3 years, but I've got other characters in other parts of the world doing other things with their story, and they can't just kind of like sit around for 3 years twiddling their thumbs and until their story can continue. So it's finding a way to manipulate some of the events and yet still make it feel authentic to what happened in history. So there is like a large battle in the first book that happened and something is destroyed. That's true, and I continue to have that in my story, but it's a case of what are the repercussions? What were other people doing that we didn't see before? And then introducing fictional characters where I'm not kind of beholden to what they might do. I can kind of say, right, I can have this person go here and do this thing because they're completely made up. And so that was interesting challenge. And then trying to bring in a little bit of magic, but also thinking about, well, where would it have come from? How would it have evolved in our world? What could I base it on that's real and extend it to the kind of what if scenario, which is what I did. Everything's kind of, well, what if? It wasn't just, oh, here's some dragons suddenly, because there weren't dragons roaming around the skies like in Game of Thrones in 12th century Persia. So I haven't made it a wholly fantastical world and said, oh, it's inspired by. I'm kind of basing it on and still having it set within our world very much. It's not a parallel version of Earth. It is, this is Earth in the 13th century. This is what happened. I'm just telling a story around that period and using the events to kind of inspire me and bounce off and then use other things. I mean, the trilogy does steer away from history. I am telling other things. I am moving things slightly further. So it's not historically accurate. After a while, I do deviate, but, I've based certain things on real historic events. Then again, most people don't know a lot about this period. They don't know a lot about the events that shaped the world in this part of the world during that era. So it will feel purely like fantasy to them. And because a lot of people don't know about the history and the culture of this period and this part of the world too, it'll also feel like a kind of fantasy world. So the best comments I've had from people who've read the first two books have said, I now want to go and find out more about this period. I want to know how much you actually based is real and what you've made up. So that's been really interesting for people to say, I want to know more. And they've gone off to read actual history books about this period. So that's been really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. I do have the feeling, though, that if you had written Genghis Khan with dragons, it would have gone down an absolute treat. And the whole idea of like people twiddling their thumbs for 3 years, that could be sort of like that's veering into like cozy fantasy sort of like realms, isn't it? But I love that you've sort of decided right now I'm gonna play with history. I'm not gonna use it. I'm not gonna be strict with it. I'm gonna invent people. I'm gonna use it as a playground. That approach is kind of novel in itself, isn't it? What gave you the idea to want to even do that?
I was just kind of interested in this period of history. I'd done some research. I'd been reading about it. I fell down some YouTube black holes about it, watching videos. And I just started building up research in the background, thinking, I'm going to tell a story in this era somewhere. And then over like several years, I was just constantly collecting information and jotting it down and building up this kind of world Bible. And as I explored this period, there are a number of gaps that made me wonder, oh, well, you could tell an interesting story there, or we don't know anything about this character. There's very, very little written about them. I could use them and tell my own story now because we know almost nothing about them from history. And so it was just finding those gaps and those cracks that made me think there's not a lot that's been written about this. There aren't any other historical fantasy period books in this period for adults. They don't exist. There's historical fiction. Conan Golden has done a number of historical fiction books about the Mongol Empire, and they're sort of as close as he can get to factual events with real characters. But in terms of historical fantasy, no one's done it before. No one's done it in this part of the world in this era. So it was kind of whole cloth. I can kind of do what I want. I'm not saying, oh, you've written a book that's similar to X or Y, because it doesn't exist. So that was an interesting challenge too. And I'm always looking to push myself and do something new. And this was definitely a challenge. This was really difficult at times, but it was rewarding because I felt like I'd created something new and unique. And so that was really special for me.
Yeah, and I feel like you get to make your own rules for a lot of it because you don't have to be so tied to history because you putting fiction into it deliberately. And I love that you've taken that approach with it. But in terms of pushing yourself to do new things, tell me a little bit about your latest novella, because that is something that's completely new for you, right?
Yes. So I'm taking my first step into self-publishing. It's been something I've been thinking about for a while. A number of my friends are hybrid authors. And so I wrote this novella, this story a while ago, and it's a bit of a weird one because one, it's a novella, and two, it crosses a number of genre boundaries. And I kind of left it for a while thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll turn it into a novel one day, or maybe I'll do something with it. And every time I revisited it, I realized that it wasn't a novel. It was what it was. The story was as long as it needed to be. And I kept thinking, oh, maybe I can, change the genres to make it something else. And after a while, I thought, no, it's fine as it is. But because one, it's a novella, two, it crosses a number of genre borders, all of these things make it really difficult to sell traditionally. There are not many small publishers that would take something like this. And we approached a couple and they were a bit not really sure because it crosses too many genre boundaries. So in the end, I thought, I do want to get into self-publishing. And this is a good opportunity to start with a smaller project, to learn the process. I've spoken to a lot of self-published authors before, but I've never done it myself. And so this was a great learning exercise for projects in the future. So I've done, finding an editor, working with an editor, getting good feedback, revising it, proofreading it, working with an artist on the cover, completely my whole thing. So in every book that I've done before, traditionally published, I have worked with the artist. It's part of the process you go through. Myself, my editor, and the artist talk about ideas. We brainstorm things. They come up with different designs, and then you pick one. This was slightly different because it's all on me. Now it's the case of I gave the designer some ideas, but I also said, right, based upon what you know about the book and what I've told you, come up with something that's completely your own. Don't just be a slave to what I've said. And we ended up picking that design because it was way better than something that I do. Because I'm not a visual person. This is why I write. I'm not an artist. I can't draw. And I'm not a visual person. So I said to her, right, you come up with something. Just we'll see. And that idea was way better than mine. So yeah. So at the event, I will have physical copies for sale of my first self-published novella. And I'm really looking forward to it. I've had some early feedback. I've had some proofreaders. I've had some authors read it as well, and they've given me some great cover quotes. So that was a brand new experience going through all of this by myself and managing the whole process completely from start to finish. And yeah, it's a very different kind of project. It's not traditional fantasy. And so I'm curious to see what people will feel about it.
Yeah, and so the title is New York Minute, right? So give us a little bit of a snapshot into what this is going to involve, what the little bit of a taste, Stephen, as to what this New York Minute is going to feel like.
So it's a noir story. It's set in an alternate New York. It's very much a crime story. It's a PI in a different New York investigating. A woman goes missing and he's hired to investigate her absence and what happened to her. And that's the story, but it's set in a world that is not ours, in a New York that is not ours. There are some fantasy elements, but there's no wizards, there's no dragons, there's no monsters, there's no magic. It's very much a story about people, about place. And because it's not our New York, it's this other New York. It's a case of, if we go to a new place and we start over as they have in the story, what do we carry with us? What do we always take with us as people, as individuals, as a society? If we're given a clean slate and started over, what kind of people are we? What do we always take with us? What are the good things that we take with us and what are the bad things that we take with us? And so while it is a noir story and it is dealing with criminals and gangs, and some people have described it as sort of a fantasy version of the gangs of New York or something like that. And some people said, fantasy noir. It is in terms of technology, but really it's a story about us now in the 21st century. All my stories trace back, they're all kind of holding up a mirror to stuff that we have in the real world today. And this one's no different. So it is brutal. It is violent. There's adult language and swearing. It's definitely not a book for people who are sensitive to that kind of thing. But really, it's a story about people. It's about friendship. It's about find family. And it's a story about the things we do to ourselves as people and as a society. And yeah, it's like it's 42,000 words. So it's just slightly long for a novella. But I'm really happy with how it's come out. And I'm happy with the early feedback that I've had from readers and other authors who have read it and said, it's great. It does exactly what you said it was. And they really liked it. So I'm looking forward to people reading it. It comes out on October the 1st, but we're, a couple of days before at the event, I will have some physical copies there with me.
That's awesome. I can't wait to pick one up. It's going to be great. The only thing that I am a little bit I think it's a great title, don't get me wrong, but the only thing that I am a little bit concerned about is how many people are going to start coming up to you talking about Don Henley and
That's fine.
in a New York
humming
minute.
the tune. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're going to get sick of that song real quick?
No, I think it made him a lot of money, and this makes me a lot of money. I'll be fine. So it's a good way in, and it's a good kind of note because it's a case of it's taken from the phrase that New York Minute, where things change incredibly fast and overnight, in kind of a blink of eye, things can happen, and it's the same. That's why I've done it on purpose, because the story, things flip really, really quickly. I came up with a bunch of other titles in the end. I kept coming back to this one and thought, no, it is New York, and it is reflective of the story, and it is kind of based upon the theme. So I'm fine. Hum the tune at me. I'll be okay with
it. And for any of our listeners who haven't heard the song, just go spend a moment now to go read because it's a great song, right? It's a classic.
Great classic. Yeah, it really is. It's awesome.
Tell us a little bit about, so obviously you're going to be there in Shrewsbury, you're going to have copies of New York Minute with you. Will your other books be sort of like with you as well for anybody who wants to pick up copies? And
yes, I'll have some of The Coward and the Warrior, which is a duology that's complete. I'll have some of them, and I'll have some of Judas Blossom and the Blood Dim Tide with me as well. So those are the ones that I'll have in Shrewsbury.
Perfect. And if anybody wants to ask Stephen about the differences, because I want to ask about the differences between traditional and self-publishing and your experiences with that, but I'm going to save those questions for the event, because then it gives me something to be able to come and have a chat with you about there. So that's perfect. Yeah. And also, because for any of our listeners who are we'll just end up chatting about that forever, Stephen. So let's save that for Shrewsbury. For anybody who wants to sort of look into you and get in touch with you before the event or anything like that, where can they find you online?
I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, and I'm always on either one of them, posting about writing and books and stuff. Or you can just check out my website, which is stephen-aryan.com. There's information on there about all my news, books, and you can sign up for my monthly newsletter as well through my website, which I kind of just send a monthly newsletter out saying what I'm doing, what's going on, where I'm with various projects, and also upcoming events. So those are the best places to find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today and for telling me a bit about your books and about what you're looking forward to when it comes to the SFF Spotlight. For everybody who's listening, it's the Nerdy Cafe, Shrewsbury, September 29th, and we will see you there. But thank you, Stephen, and it's genuine pleasure.
All right. See you there, everyone.